Love Beneath the Cloud Shadows follows the tender first love between a village boy and his childhood friend. From lanternlit study sessions to promises whispered by the river, their bond grows, only to be stretched by distance and diverging paths. Through letters never sent, brief homecomings, and the quiet ache of waiting, the story unfolds as a meditation on love, loss, and the passage of time. In the end, their love lingers not as possession, but as a gentle memory, like a drifting cloud that once shaded their youth. Chapter 1: Childhood Encounters. The countryside of my childhood was not painted with bright colors or grand landscapes. It was a patchwork of rice paddies, narrow dirt paths lined with wild shrubs, and the endless chatter of cicadas echoing in the lazy afternoon heat. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and smoke from cooking fires. It was here, in this simple, almost forgotten place, that I first learned the peculiar weight of a girl's name, Lynn. Her family had moved from the town to our village when we were in middle school. To us village kids, her family seemed rich, though in truth they were just better off than the rest of us. Her father worked at the district office. Her mother owned a small shop near the market. They had things we could only dream of: a color television, a motorbike, and shelves lined with books that smelled of ink and paper, far more refined than our worn, borrowed textbooks. I remember the first time I saw her. It was a hot morning in September, the sky the color of faded denim, when our teacher introduced her to the class. "This is Lynn," she said, smiling. "She will be studying with us this year. Everyone make her feel welcome." Her white uniform was crisp, her hair tied neatly in two braids that swung like pendulums when she bowed politely to the class. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged somewhere grander, but her eyes, sharp and curious, betrayed a kind of defiance, as if daring anyone to underestimate her. I, for one, disliked her instantly. She sat near the front, hand always raised, voice always steady when answering questions. Where the rest of us stumbled and mumbled, she spoke like she had rehearsed the lines the night before. I caught her glancing at me once when I failed to solve a math problem on the board. There was no malice in her look, but to me, it felt like a spotlight, harsh and unyielding. After school, she rarely mingled with us. While we lingered by the river, skipping stones or chasing dragonflies, she would be fetched by her mother's motorbike. The sound of the engine revving up the dusty road always made us pause. We would watch her ride away, her braids bouncing, while the rest of us trudged home on bare feet. I told myself she was arrogant, spoiled, someone who would never belong here. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One afternoon, our homeroom teacher pulled me aside after class. "You're doing well, but you need discipline. I'm pairing you with Lynn for evening study sessions. She will help you and you will behave." I wanted to protest. Of all the classmates, why her? But the teacher's eyes were firm and my words died in my throat. That evening, I trudged reluctantly to her house. It was bigger than any in the village, with tiled floors and the faint smell of jasmine from a vase near the window. She greeted me politely, though her tone carried the hint of command. "You're late," she said, tapping the cover of her notebook. "Sit down, let's start." From the very first session, we clashed. "You can't just guess," she scolded when I tried to rush through a problem. "And you can't just act like you know everything," I shot back. Her brows furrowed, but instead of arguing further, she pushed the notebook toward me. "Then prove it, solve this one without help." I tried, I failed. She sighed, exasperated, yet there was something in the way she leaned over to explain, her finger tracing numbers neatly, her voice patient despite her annoyance, that unsettled me. It wasn't just that she was smart. It was that she cared enough to make me understand. No one had done that before. Days turned into weeks and the evenings became routine. At first, I dreaded them. Then slowly, I began to look forward to them. I discovered that behind her sharp tongue was a girl who laughed easily, who hummed songs while flipping pages, who sometimes stared out the window at the dusk sky as if dreaming of a world beyond our village. "You think too much," I teased once, catching her lost in thought. "And you don't think enough," she replied, smirking. "Sometimes we argued. Sometimes we sat in silence, the only sound the scratching of pencils and the chorus of crickets outside. But in that silence, something shifted. The distance I had built between us out of envy and pride began to crumble. One evening, when the power went out and the room was lit only by a kerosene lamp, she asked suddenly, "Do you ever wonder what it's like to live in the city?" I shrugged. "I wonder what it's like to have enough to eat every day. That's already something." She studied me for a moment, then smiled, not with mockery, but with something softer. "Maybe you're luckier than you think. At least you know how to be content." Her words lingered with me long after I walked home under the starlit sky, fireflies glowing in the ditches like scattered embers. Looking back, I realized those evenings were when the first threads of something fragile and unnamed began weaving themselves between us. At the time, I could not have called it love. It was simply a presence, a warmth that unsettled me whenever she leaned too close, whenever her laughter broke through the monotony of numbers and formulas. I told myself I still disliked her, that she was just a nuisance I had to endure. But in truth, I carried her voice with me, even in dreams. And though I could not have known it then, those study sessions, the arguments, the stolen glances, the quiet companionship, would become the foundation of a story I would never forget. Chapter 2: The Evenings of Study. The evenings became our unspoken ritual. By the time the sun dipped low behind the rice fields and the cicadas grew quiet, I would already be on the familiar dirt path leading to her house. Sometimes the sky was painted in streaks of crimson and gold. Sometimes it was pale and heavy with clouds. But no matter the weather, my steps carried me there as though pulled by a thread I could not see. Her home glowed like a lantern on the edge of the village, light spilling out of the windows long before the rest of us lit our kerosene lamps. I always paused at the gate, half reluctant, half expectant, listening for the faint strains of the radio or her laughter before knocking. And each time she appeared with the same mixture of sternness and warmth, ushering me inside as though I belonged, though she would never admit it. We studied at the wooden table near the window, books stacked neatly on one side, a lamp casting a circle of gold that shrank the outside world to nothing. At first, my clumsy handwriting and careless mistakes drove her mad. She tapped her pencil against the page, scolding me with the precision of a teacher far older than her years. "You must concentrate," she would insist, her voice sharp yet strangely musical. "If you don't care, no one can help you." I rolled my eyes, muttered under my breath, but I found myself listening, trying harder. For all her impatience, she had a way of making me believe I could do more. Some nights the air was stifling, sweat dripping down our foreheads as moths battered against the lamp glass. Other nights the monsoon rains pounded on the roof, drowning our words, so we had to lean closer, almost whispering, our shoulders brushing as thunder rolled across the fields. Those were the nights when I realized that studying with her was no longer a duty, but a strange kind of refuge. There were moments of rebellion, too. She once caught me doodling a caricature of our teacher in the margin of my notebook. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second I braced for scolding. But then she snorted, covering her mouth as laughter spilled out, soft and uncontrollable. It was the first time I had heard her laugh like that, unguarded, as though she had forgotten to keep up the wall she always built around herself. I found myself grinning like a fool, wanting to hear it again, wanting to be the cause of it. Bit by bit, she revealed corners of herself that others rarely saw. She admitted she sometimes hated being the good daughter, always watched, always expected to excel. She told me about the books she read in secret, stories of faraway cities and people who lived lives so different from ours. Her eyes lit up as she described bustling streets, bright lights, and dreams of traveling beyond the narrow lanes of our village. I listened, half enthralled, half uneasy, because every word she spoke carried the scent of distance, of leaving. "You'll go to the city one day," I said once, more accusation than prediction. She glanced at me, then smiled faintly. "Maybe. But you'll still be here, won't you? I wanted to deny it, to claim I too would leave, that I would chase after something bigger. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. My family, my roots, my fears, all of it tied me to this soil. So I stayed silent, tracing the grooves of the wooden table with my finger while she returned to her book. Despite our differences, we found small joys. On evenings when studying felt unbearable, she would close the notebook with a decisive snap and say, "Let's take a break." We would sit by the window watching fireflies drift like tiny lanterns in the dark. Sometimes she hummed a tune, one I did not know but wished I could hold on to. Once, emboldened, I asked her to teach me. She shook her head. "It wouldn't sound right in your voice," she teased. But her eyes softened, as if the thought of me singing her song amused her more than she would admit. The village soon noticed our routine. Neighbors whispered, children teased, but we ignored them. For us, the evenings were hours alone, carved out of the monotony of rural life. I told myself it was just studying, nothing more, but deep down, I knew it was becoming something else. Her presence lingered with me long after I left, her words echoing in my mind as I lay awake under the mosquito net, staring at the wooden ceiling. One night, as I gathered my books to leave, she caught me by the sleeve. Her hand was small, almost weightless, yet it stopped me cold. "You're improving," she said softly, eyes avoiding mine. "Don't waste it." I wanted to thank her, to tell her how much it meant, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I nodded, clutching the memory of her touch as if it were something rare and fragile. As the months passed, the boundary between teacher and student blurred. We bickered less, laughed more, and fell into rhythms that felt natural, inevitable. Yet beneath it all, I sensed a tension, an unspoken question neither of us dared to voice. Was this merely friendship, or was it something more, something we were too young or too afraid to name? I carried that question with me each time I walked home through the quiet fields, the night heavy with the scent of grass and wet soil. The stars above seemed endless, indifferent, but I clung to the thought that somewhere under that same sky, she too might be lying awake thinking of me. And though we never spoke of it, those evenings of study bound us together in ways no one else could understand. They were the beginning of everything that followed. The laughter, the heartbreak, the memories that would cling like burrs of C-letter 1 ECF May long after she was gone. Chapter 3, River, Water, Danger. The river was both a gift and a threat. It curled along the edge of our village like a restless serpent, glittering under the sun, yet dark and unpredictable when the rains came. To most of us boys, it was a place of freedom, of daring leaps and noisy splashes, a world where we could pretend we were braver than we really were. To her, it was something else entirely, a line she never crossed, though she often stood at the bank, watching with that look of half disapproval, half fear. It was the middle of summer when the incident happened. The season when the heat pressed down so fiercely that even the cicadas seemed exhausted, their song rasping and broken. After a long evening of study, I had teased her about her seriousness. "Books won't cool you down," I said, grinning. "The river will." She rolled her eyes but followed me anyway, perhaps out of boredom, perhaps because she was curious. The water shimmered in the moonlight, dark silver ripples stretching far into the distance. The other boys had already stripped to their shorts and were yelling as they dove in, their laughter echoing across the banks. I jumped too, letting the cold shock wash over me, my body alive with exhilaration. When I surfaced, sputtering, I saw her standing on the edge, arms crossed, frowning. "Don't just stand there," I shouted, splashing water in her direction. "I'm not going in," she replied firmly, shaking her head. "It's dangerous. Dangerous, it's just water," I laughed, diving under again, emerging closer to her. "You're too careful, come on, just your feet." She hesitated, and for a moment I thought I had convinced her. She stepped forward, toes grazing the surface. But then a shout broke the night. One of the smaller boys, eager to prove himself, had swum too far into the deeper part where the current was strongest. His cries sliced through our laughter, high and panicked. The others froze, fear rooting them in place. Without thinking, I lunged toward him, my strokes clumsy but desperate. The river pulled hard, dragging us both downstream. I grabbed his arm, his small body thrashing, his nails scratching my skin as he fought against me. Water rushed into my mouth, burning my throat. For a terrifying instant, I thought we would both vanish beneath the current. And then she was there. I don't know how she had moved so quickly, but she had waded in up to her waist, her skirt clinging to her legs, her arms outstretched. "Push him toward me," she screamed. Her voice cut through the roar of the water, sharp and commanding. With the last of my strength, I shoved the boy in her direction. She caught him, hauling him toward the shallows, her face pale but determined. I struggled after them, lungs on fire, vision blurred. By the time I collapsed onto the mud of the riverbank, coughing and gasping, she was already bending over the boy, checking his breathing with a calmness I would never have imagined. He sputtered, choked, and then wailed, alive. Relief swept through the gathered crowd like wind through dry grass. She looked up at me then, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her chest heaving. There was no triumph in her expression, only fury. "You could have drowned," she snapped, voice trembling with anger. "Both of you," I tried to laugh, though my throat still burned. "But we didn't," her eyes flashed. "You're reckless, you think nothing can touch you." "But one day," she broke off, shaking her head, unable to finish. The others dispersed quickly, the boy carried home to worried parents. Soon it was just the two of us by the riverbank, the night air heavy with the scent of wet earth and fear. She sat beside me, silent for a long while, her fingers digging into the mud as though she needed to hold onto something solid. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "I hate this river." I turned my head, surprised. "But you saved him," she gave a bitter smile. "Maybe, but the water doesn't care. It could have taken any of us. It almost took you." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the night itself. I wanted to tell her I wasn't afraid, that I had always been strong, that I would never let the river win. But deep inside, I knew the truth. When the current pulled me under, I had felt how small I was, how fragile. What saved me wasn't strength, but her, standing in the water despite her fear, pulling us back to life. From that night on, the river changed for me. It was no longer just a playground or a test of courage. It became a reminder of danger, of her bravery, of the way her eyes had burned with both anger and something I couldn't name. And though we never spoke of it again, every time I passed by the water's edge, I thought of her, of how close we had come to being lost, and how close we had come to something else entirely. That summer, the river kept flowing, indifferent as ever. But for us, it marked a boundary, a line between childhood games and something heavier, something that made the nights feel both more fragile and more precious. Chapter 4: The Festival Lanterns. The festival came as it always did, breaking the monotony of village days with color, sound, and the faint promise of magic. By late afternoon, the lanes were already crowded with stalls selling sugarcane, candied fruit, and paper toys that fluttered in the breeze. The air smelled of grilled corn and sticky rice, and children darted between legs with their faces smeared in sweetness. She and I walked together, though not side by side at first. She carried herself with the calm composure she always wore in public, chin slightly lifted, eyes surveying the scene as though she were above it all. I, on the other hand, could barely keep still, tugging her arm toward each stall, insisting she try this, look at that. She sighed, pretending annoyance, but I caught the faint curve of her lips each time I succeeded in pulling her closer. When dusk fell, the lanterns appeared. They hung from bamboo poles, lined the eaves of houses, floated on the river like stars scattered across dark water. Reds, yellows, and soft whites flickered against the night, their reflections trembling with each ripple. The whole village seemed transformed, as if we had stepped into a world apart where the ordinary rules no longer applied. We bought 2 small lanterns from an old woman whose hands shook as she lit the wicks. She told us, as tradition dictated, to make a wish before placing them on the water. I watched her close her eyes briefly, lips moving in silent prayer. When she opened them, the firelight glowed in her gaze, softer than I had ever seen. "What did you wish for?" I asked as we knelt at the river's edge. She shook her head. "If I tell you, it won't come true." "That's just what people say," I teased. Tell me." She dipped her lantern into the current, letting it drift away before answering, her voice almost lost in the noise around us. I wished for courage. The word startled me. Courage for what? To leave, to face something she hadn't yet revealed. I wanted to ask, but my lantern was slipping from my fingers, bobbing uncertainly on the water. She reached out, steadying my hand, guiding it until the tiny light floated steadily downstream. Her touch lingered, light but firm, and for a moment, the whole world narrowed to that single contact. The crowd cheered as hundreds of lanterns gathered in clusters, drifting like constellations across the dark river. Music started, drums and flutes, uneven but full of life. Young men set off small fireworks, sparks hissing into the sky before bursting into blossoms of color. Children screamed in delight, chasing each other with sparklers that traced glowing trails in the air. She rarely joined such noise, but that night something shifted. Perhaps it was the lanterns, perhaps the music, perhaps the memory of the river's danger still clinging to us. Whatever it was, she laughed clear, unguarded, and for the first time, she looked like a girl my age rather than the stern teacher she played each evening. Her eyes reflected the lantern light, and for a heartbeat, I thought she looked like one of them, fragile, glowing, ready to drift away at any moment. We wandered through the crowd, and I found myself wanting to win something for her, as the other boys did for their sisters or sweethearts. At a game stall, I threw rings at bottles, missing horribly at first. She mocked me, arms crossed, but I caught the flicker of amusement she tried to hide. On my last attempt, by some miracle, the ring landed true. The prize was a small paper fan painted with a crane in flight. I offered it to her, embarrassed by its simplicity. She accepted it without a word, but she carried it the rest of the night, tucked carefully against her chest. As the festival waned, the crowd thinned, leaving lanterns still drifting on the river like distant dreams. We sat on the steps by the water, tired but unwilling to go home just yet. The noise faded behind us, replaced by the soft lap of water and the crackle of the last fireworks. "Did you really wish for courage?" I asked again, quieter this time. She nodded, not looking at me. "Yes, because I'm afraid. Afraid of what comes next, afraid of leaving and of staying." Her voice trembled, though she fought to keep it steady. I didn't know how to answer. I had never thought of the future beyond the fields, the seasons, the endless rhythm of planting and harvest. But she carried dreams larger than the village, dreams that frightened her even as they pulled her forward. And in that moment, I realized something I had always avoided, that one day she might go where I could not follow. Still, I forced a smile. "Then I'll wish for you," I said. "For me," she glanced at me puzzled. "For your courage," I replied. "So when you find it, you'll know it wasn't only yours." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You say the strangest things." But her eyes lingered on mine, and in their glow, I thought I saw gratitude, or perhaps something deeper, something neither of us dared to name. That night, as we finally parted ways, she still carried the fan I had won for her. The lanterns continued down the river, tiny flames floating into darkness, each carrying a wish the night would keep secret. And I carried mine too, not spoken, not even fully formed, but burning just as quietly. Chapter 5, The First Goodbye. The summer slipped away faster than I expected. One moment we were lighting lanterns by the river, the next the cicadas were gone and the mornings carried the sharp edge of autumn. School began again, and with it came whispers of change, rumors of exams, of transfers, of opportunities far beyond the reach of our small village. She grew quieter during those weeks. Though we still met in the evenings, books spread across the same wooden table. I noticed her gaze drifting more often toward the window, her pencil hovering above the page without moving. When I teased her, she didn't snap back like before. Instead, she smiled faintly, as if her mind were already elsewhere. One evening, after we had finished reviewing a passage of literature, she closed her book and folded her hands in her lap. "I have something to tell you," she said. Her voice was calm, but I felt a strange weight settle in my chest. "What is it?" She hesitated, then looked straight at me. "I've been accepted into a school in the city." I'll be leaving at the end of the month. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. The city was a place from her stories, a world of bright lights and endless streets. It had always belonged to her dreams, not to reality. And yet here it was, intruding into our evenings, threatening to pull her away. I forced a laugh, though it came out hollow. So you finally get to escape us country folk. It's not like that, she said quickly. It's something I've worked for. My parents think it's the best chance I'll have. Of course it is, I muttered, staring at the worn surface of the table. You've always wanted more. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. She reached across as if to touch my hand, but pulled back at the last moment. I didn't know how to tell you, she admitted softly. I didn't want you to be angry. I'm not angry, I lied, though my chest burned with something I couldn't name. Anger, yes, but also fear and a hollow sadness that threatened to swallow me whole. In the days that followed, the village buzzed with news of her departure. Some spoke with pride, others with envy. Parents pointed her out as an example to their children. The boys at school teased me mercilessly, saying I would lose my teacher soon. I laughed along with them, but each word was a reminder, sharp and relentless. Our study sessions continued, but they felt different now. Every page we turned seemed like a countdown. Sometimes she talked about the city, her eyes bright as she described the library she had seen in pictures, the wide boulevards, the trains that ran like veins of light. I listened, nodding, but inside, a voice whispered that she was already slipping away, carried forward by dreams that had no place for me. One evening I asked her, "Will you come back?" She paused, pencil poised above her notebook. "Of course," she said, but the hesitation before her answer echoed louder than the words themselves. The night of her departure arrived with little warning. The air was cool, carrying the scent of ripening rice. Her family gathered at the edge of the village, luggage piled high on the cart that would take them to the station. Neighbors came to bid farewell, offering blessings and gifts of food for the journey. I stood at the back, hands clenched, unsure if I even had the right to say goodbye. She spotted me anyway, weaving through the crowd until she stood before me. She was dressed simply, yet she seemed different already, straighter, steadier, as though the city had already claimed her. "You came," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Of course," I replied, my voice rough. "I had to make sure you don't forget us." "As if I could," she whispered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Around us, voices rose and fell, children laughed, the cart creaked under the weight of trunks. She pressed something into my hand, a folded piece of paper. "Don't open it now," she instructed. Later, I wanted to ask her to stay, to say the words burning at the back of my throat. But I couldn't. She had wished for courage, and now she had found it. How could I take that away from her? So instead I said, "Good luck." Her eyes softened. "Take care of yourself. And don't stop studying, even if I'm not here to nag you." Then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd, climbing onto the cart as the wheels began to turn. I watched until the lantern light no longer touched her face, until the road stretched empty into darkness. Only then did I unfold the paper. In her careful handwriting, she had written a single line. "Some wishes need two people to carry them." I stood there long after the others had left, clutching the note in the dim light. The night was silent except for the rustle of the fields, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to feel both proud and broken at once. It was the first goodbye, but I knew it would not be the last. In Chapter 6, Letters from the City. At first, the days after she left felt strangely hollow. The evenings stretched long and quiet, the table by the window stacked with books that no longer seemed to matter. I told myself I would continue studying, but without her voice scolding or encouraging me, the words blurred, the ink smeared, and my attention wandered. The village carried on as it always did. Fields needed tending, neighbors exchanged gossip. But for me, everything seemed muted, as though a piece of color had been stripped away. Then her first letter arrived. It came folded neatly in an envelope, my name written in her careful hand. My heart raced as I tore it open, the paper trembling in my fingers. She wrote about the journey, The train that roared like thunder, the blur of landscapes rushing past, the dizzying lights of the city at night. She described her new school with awe. Classrooms twice as large as ours, a library filled with shelves upon shelves of books, teachers who spoke briskly and expected more than she thought she could give. But between those lines, I found pieces of the girl I knew. She complained about the noise, about the crowds that never seemed to thin, about missing the sound of cicadas and the quiet nights by the river. She ended with a simple line. "Write back or I'll think you've forgotten me." I didn't need to be told twice. That night I sat by the lamp and wrote my clumsy reply. I told her about the village, the harvest coming early, the neighbor's cow giving birth, the younger boys daring each other at the riverbank but never straying too far. I teased her about her complaints, reminding her she had always wanted more. But I also confessed, in words scratched nervously on the page, that things weren't the same without her. From then on, the letters became our bridge. Each week, sometimes longer, I would find her words waiting for me, crisp and alive with the city's pulse. She wrote about new friends, about a girl in her class who laughed too loudly, about the boy who borrowed her notes without asking. She spoke of teachers who pushed her harder than she thought possible, of nights spent studying until her eyes blurred. And always, somewhere in the letter, a small piece of memory from home. The taste of grilled corn, the sound of frogs after rain, the way the lanterns had floated down the river. I answered faithfully, pouring more of myself into each reply than I ever admitted aloud. I told her of the village's quiet rhythms, of my stumbling attempts to keep studying, of how the river no longer felt like freedom, but like something waiting for me to face again. I didn't say I missed her, not directly, but my words circled it, hinted at it, until I wondered if she could read between the lines. Sometimes her letters carried something extra, a pressed flower from the city park, a ticket stub from a play she had attended, a sketch she had made of the library's towering shelves. Once she sent a photograph, her first. She stood among a group of classmates, hair neatly tied back, uniform crisp, her face serious but her eyes unmistakably hers. I carried that photograph folded in my pocket until it was soft at the edges, pulling it out when the evenings felt too empty. The villagers noticed, of course. They saw the letters, the way I lingered by the postman, the way my face lit up when I held an envelope with her handwriting. They teased me, but their words no longer mattered. For in those letters, she was still with me and I with her, even if only in ink and paper. Yet beneath the comfort, there was an unease I couldn't shake. Her words grew fuller, brighter, filled with stories of new experiences I couldn't share. She wrote of plays, of museums, of streets lit so brightly they erased the stars. Each description made me proud of her, yet also painfully aware of the distance growing between us. She was becoming part of a world I had never seen, while I remained rooted in the fields and lanes we had once walked together. One evening, after reading her letter about a debate competition she had won, I stared at the page for a long time. She had signed off with her usual playful scold, "Don't slack off. You promised me you'd keep studying." But the words felt different now, not just a reminder but a challenge. Could I keep up with her, or would I always be left behind, reading about her life like a story in which I was no longer a character? I didn't answer that letter right away. For the first time, I hesitated, afraid my words would sound too small against the brightness of hers. But after 3 nights of silence, I picked up my pen. I wrote not of the village, but of myself, of my struggles, my doubts, my desire to be more than what the village expected of me. I didn't know if I was brave enough to leave, but I wanted her to know I was trying. Her reply came weeks later, longer than usual. She didn't offer easy comfort. Instead, she wrote, "You don't have to follow me to the city to matter, but don't let the world convince you you're less than you are. You once told me you'd wish for my courage. Maybe it's time you wished for your own." I read those words over and over until they carved themselves into me. The letters continued, steady as the seasons, carrying us through months of separation. They couldn't replace the sound of her laughter, the feel of her hand guiding mine across the page. but they were enough to remind me we were still bound by something invisible, fragile yet enduring. And yet deep down, I knew letters could only carry us so far. Chapter 7: The Winter Return. Winter came quietly, slipping into the village on the breath of cold winds that stripped the trees bare and sent smoke curling from every roof. The fields lay dormant, earth cracked and pale under the frost. Nights grew longer, days sharper, and the stars seemed closer, burning clear and cold above us. It was during one of those brittle mornings that word spread. She was coming home. The news moved through the village faster than fire through dry straw. Neighbors whispered with pride. Children shouted her name as if she were a hero returning from some faraway land. My chest tightened at the thought. I had imagined this moment in countless ways, her smile, her voice, her eyes. But the truth was, I didn't know how to face her now that months of city life stood between us. She arrived in the evening, riding in the same cart that had once carried her away. Only now she seemed transformed. Her clothes were warmer, finer, her hair tied neatly beneath a woolen cap. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The villagers gathered to greet her, offering questions, congratulations, admiration. She accepted them all with polite smiles, her voice calm, but her eyes searched the crowd until they found me. For a heartbeat, it was as though nothing had changed. That familiar spark flickered, bridging the months of absence. She stepped toward me, and though I wanted to run forward to close the distance, my feet felt rooted in the frozen earth. "You've grown thinner," she said, her tone half teasing, half concerned. "And you've grown," I faltered, searching for the right word. Beautiful felt too obvious, distant. Different felt too cold. In the end, I simply said, "Taller." She laughed, the same laugh that once spilled out over notebooks and candlelight. For a moment, the city fell away and we were just ourselves again. The following days passed in a blur of visits and gatherings. Her parents hosted neighbors who wanted to hear every detail of her new life. She spoke of classrooms filled with maps and globes, of books she had borrowed from the library, of the constant hum of the city. Her words painted pictures none of us had seen, and though I listened with pride, I felt again that distance widening like a river between us. But she hadn't forgotten me. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she slipped away from her house and came to mine. We sat outside, breath clouding in the cold, watching the last light fade. She handed me a small package wrapped in paper. "I brought you something," she said. Inside was a book, its cover worn, its spine sturdy, the title embossed in gold letters. It was a collection of stories, tales from faraway lands I could only dream of. My hands trembled as I held it. "I thought of you when I found it," she explained. "I remembered how you used to doodle in the margins instead of reading. Maybe this will change that." I wanted to tell her I had kept her letters close, that her words had been enough to keep me from giving up. Instead, I only said, "Thank you." But my voice carried more than gratitude. It carried the ache of missing her, the relief of having her near, and the fear of losing her again. We talked until the stars rose high. She asked about the village, about the small things that letters couldn't capture, the sound of the frogs in the ditches, the way the old banyan tree creaked in the wind. I told her everything, and she listened as if those details mattered more than the grand stories she carried from the city. Then almost shyly I asked, "Are you happy there?" She fell silent, eyes fixed on the stars. "Sometimes," she admitted, "sometimes I feel alive, like I'm exactly where I need to be. But other times," she paused, her breath visible in the cold. "Other times I feel like I'm drifting too far, like the lanterns we once set on the river, bright for a while then gone." Her words struck me because they echoed the fear I hadn't dared to name. I wanted to tell her she wasn't drifting alone, that I was still here, holding onto the invisible thread that bound us. But I couldn't. Instead, I reached out, hesitating only a moment before covering her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. The days of her visit passed quickly, too quickly. She was pulled in every direction, family duties, neighbors eager for stories, old friends wanting her company. I saw her less than I wanted, and when I did, the knowledge of her coming departure hung over us like a shadow. On her last night, we walked to the river. The air was sharp, the water dark and still. She stood at the bank, staring at the reflection of the moon. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. "How could I forget?" I replied. We didn't speak of the near drowning or the lanterns or the countless evenings of study. We didn't need to. All of it was there, carried silently between us. When the time came for her to leave again, I didn't wait at the edge of the village with the crowd. Instead, I went to the fields, standing where the wind could sweep my thoughts away. I watched the cart roll past in the distance, her figure faint beneath the morning light. She didn't see me, but I knew she looked for me just as I searched for her. Only after the dust had settled did I pull out the book she had given me. On the first page, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "For the nights when I cannot be there, let these words keep you company." See, I traced the letters again and again, my breath misting in the cold air. It was her first return, but as I closed the book, I realized something both comforting and painful. She would always return, but she would also always leave. Chapter 8: Shadows of Distance. The weeks after her departure felt heavier than before. Perhaps it was because I had tasted what it meant to have her close again. The sound of her laughter carried on the frosty wind, the warmth of her presence in the dim glow of the lantern, the book she had pressed into my hands with such quiet tenderness. Now the absence seemed sharper, like a wound reopened. I tried to fill the days with work. The fields demanded attention even in winter, though the soil was hard and unyielding. I fixed fences, tended to the livestock, and chopped wood until my muscles ached. But every task seemed to echo with her memory. The crackle of firewood reminded me of her voice. The rhythm of the axe falling mirrored the pounding of my heart when she had looked at me with that searching gaze. Letters came, though not as often as before. They carried the scent of paper and ink, sometimes faint traces of perfume. In them she described lectures that stretched late into the night, professors who inspired and intimidated her, the ceaseless noise of the streets, and the strange loneliness that sometimes crept in despite the crowds. She asked about me, about the village, about the weather and the crops. I answered faithfully, though my words always felt small compared to hers. One evening, under the glow of an oil lamp, I read a line that stayed with me. "The city is vast, yet at times it feels like a cage. I wonder if freedom is found in the noise of progress or in the quiet of the fields." I traced the words with my finger until the ink smudged. Did she long for the village as much as I longed for her? Or was it only a passing thought, a flicker in her busy days? Seasons shifted. Spring came, coaxing life back into the earth. I worked the fields again, the scent of soil rich and promising. Birds returned, filling the mornings with song. Yet even as the world renewed itself, I felt unchanged, caught in the rhythm of waiting. It was during this time that whispers began to reach me. A neighbor's son who had visited the city claimed he had seen her walking with someone. A fellow student, perhaps. A young man with eyes sharp as glass and a smile too easy. I brushed the rumors aside, but they lodged in me like thorns. I told myself I had no right to question her life there. She was free to laugh, to talk, to walk beside whomever she chose. Yet each time I imagined it, a weight settled in my chest, heavy and unyielding. When her next letter arrived, I searched it for signs. There was no mention of anyone, only descriptions of exams and the changing leaves on the city's boulevards. She enclosed a dried flower pressed between the pages, its petals fragile, almost translucent. "From a tree near the library," she wrote. "It reminded me of the blossoms by the river." I held the flower as if it were her hand, careful not to crush it. Still the shadows of doubt lingered. Summer heat bore down, relentless and thick. The days stretched long, filled with sweat and dust. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the air heavy with the scent of hay. Sometimes I imagined her voice, soft and clear, reading aloud from the book she had given me. Other times, I heard silence so deep it seemed to swallow me whole. Her letters grew shorter, more hurried. She apologized often. I meant to write sooner, but the days slip away. and I told myself it was only the demands of her studies. Yet the rhythm of our exchange was breaking, the thread between us stretched thin. Then one late autumn evening, a letter came that felt different. Her handwriting was hurried, the ink uneven. She wrote of opportunities, scholarships, invitations, chances to travel beyond the city. Her words brimmed with excitement, with possibility. And though she ended with, "I miss home, I miss you," I could feel the distance widening. I walked to the river that night, the same river that had once almost taken her from me. The water glimmered under the moon, moving steadily toward places I could not see. I thought of her, carried forward by currents stronger than either of us could resist. The village felt smaller each day, the routines duller, the silence heavier. Yet in the midst of that quiet, I clung to the memory of her return, the sound of her laughter in the frost, the warmth of her hand beneath mine. I didn't know what the future held. Perhaps she would come back again, her presence like a fleeting season. Or perhaps one day the letters would stop, the silence becoming final. But even as the shadows of distance crept in, I knew one thing with certainty: she had changed me. The boy who once doodled in notebooks was gone. In his place stood someone who had learned to wait, to hope, and to carry the weight of a bond that stretched far beyond the fields of our village. And so I kept her book close, the pressed flower marking the page where I had left off. Each night I read a little, letting the words blur into dreams. In them she was always near, sometimes laughing by the river, sometimes sitting beside me under the stars, sometimes drifting farther than I could reach. But always, always she was there. Chapter 9, A Letter Unsent. The first chill of winter had returned, curling around the eaves of the houses, seeping into the cracks of wooden doors. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow gray spirals, and the village braced itself for the long months of cold. I had grown used to the rhythm of her absence, to the echoing quiet of days without her voice. Yet the ache remained, constant as the wind. One evening, after finishing my work in the fields, I sat alone at the small desk by the window. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. In front of me lay a blank sheet of paper, its whiteness both inviting and cruel. For weeks I had carried the thought of writing her, not just a letter filled with village news or polite questions, but something truer, something heavier. My hand trembled as I lifted the pen. "See," I began, then stopped. Even the first letter of her name felt too intimate, too fragile, as though writing it might shatter the silence between us. I stared at the page, the ink blotting into a small pool, and forced myself to continue. There are things I have never said to you, words that weigh on me in the quiet hours when the fields are empty and the stars are too bright to ignore. I paused again, listening to the soft whistle of wind outside. My chest tightened as memories rose. The night by the river, the warmth of her hand in mine, the book she had given me with her careful inscription. Each memory pressed against me, urging me forward. When you are here, the world feels sharper, brighter. Even the frost seems kinder when you laugh. And when you are gone, the days stretch like shadows, and I feel as though I am only half myself. I tell myself that waiting is enough, that the letters we exchange are enough. But the truth is they are not. I want more than words on paper. I want the sound of your voice, the way your eyes search mine as though you can see past every wall I build. I leaned back, the pen slipping from my fingers. My heart pounded as if I had just spoken the words aloud to her face. I imagined her reaction, surprise perhaps, or laughter, or silence too heavy to bear. I pressed on, the need too strong to stop. Maybe it is foolish to hope. Maybe the city will claim you entirely, and I will remain here, bound to these fields, bound to this waiting. But I cannot deny it any longer. I miss you not as a friend misses another, but as someone who has given a part of himself away and fears he will never have it back. When I finished, the page trembled in my hands. The words stared back at me, raw and unguarded. For the first time, I had put the truth into ink. I folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote her name across the front. My hand lingered on the letters. The thought of sending it filled me with both relief and terror. What if she felt the same? What if she didn't? Either way, everything would change. That night, I placed the envelope on the table beside my bed and lay awake, staring at it in the moonlight. The hours crept by, but sleep never came. Morning broke with pale light filtering through the window. I rose, dressed, and picked up the letter. My steps carried me toward the village post, each one heavier than the last. I imagined the letter in her hands, her eyes moving over the words, her breath catching at the confessions inside. At the door of the post, I stopped. The room beyond smelled of ink and dust, stacks of envelopes waiting to be carried to places I could only dream of. The clerk looked up expectant. My fingers tightened around the envelope until the paper bent. In that moment, fear overcame me, fear of her silence, fear of losing what little I still had, the letters, the returns, the fragile thread that connected us. To speak the truth was to risk breaking it entirely. I turned away. Back at home, I opened the drawer of my desk and slid the envelope inside. It lay there among scraps of paper, unseen, unsent. I told myself I would send it another day when the time felt right. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some words are meant to remain unsent, their weight carried silently in the heart. That evening, I wrote her a different letter. It was filled with the usual things: the harvest, the cold, the neighbor's new child. Safe words, harmless words. Words that would keep the thread intact, even as the unsent letter burned quietly in the drawer. When I sealed the envelope and placed it in the post, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had preserved the fragile balance between us. Heavier because I had buried the truth once more. That night, I dreamed of the river again. Only this time, it was not her hand I reached for as the current pulled me down. It was the letter, slipping from my grasp, carried away into waters too deep to follow. I woke with the taste of silence in my mouth and the certainty that my confession would remain where it was, hidden in the dark, waiting for a courage that might never come. Chapter 10, Lanterns Adrift. The winter nights grew longer, the stars clearer, and the silence heavier. The letter remained in the drawer, its presence a constant whisper at the edge of my thoughts. Each time I opened it to fetch paper or ink, my eyes fell on the envelope and my hand hovered as though it might take it up and deliver it at last. But always fear bound me, and I closed the drawer again. One evening, the village prepared for the Festival of Lanterns, the old tradition that marked the turning of the year. Families crafted delicate paper lanterns, painted with flowers, birds, and symbols of luck. When the moon rose, they would light candles within and set them afloat on the river, each one carrying a wish into the dark. I had not joined the festival in years, but that winter I found myself drawn to it as though the river itself had called my name. I spent the afternoon crafting a lantern from rice paper and bamboo. My hands, clumsy at first, grew steady as I worked. Instead of painting flowers or birds, I wrote words, small fragments of the letter I had never sent. Lines about her laughter, about the ache of waiting, about the truth I dared not confess aloud. Each word was careful, each stroke of the brush a release of something long held. When the sun fell and the village gathered by the riverbank, the air buzzed with warmth despite the cold. Children laughed as they clutched their lanterns. Couples whispered wishes before letting theirs drift. The water filled with light, small flames bobbing gently, carried by the current. I stood apart, lantern in hand, the paper trembling in the breeze. The river shimmered with reflections of fire and stars, a mirror of both heaven and earth. My chest ached as I thought of her, the way she had once stood here with me, the way the water had nearly claimed her. I crouched at the edge of the bank, shielding the flame with my palm as I lit it. The lantern glowed softly, illuminating the words scrawled across its sides. For a moment, I imagined her eyes finding them, her lips forming the words I could not speak. Then I set it gently on the water. The lantern drifted away, joining the river of light. I watched until it was just a flicker among dozens, then a spark in the distance, then nothing at all. Yet in its disappearance, I felt something lift, a quiet surrender, a confession carried by water instead of ink. As the crowd cheered and released their wishes, I stayed behind, staring into the darkness where the lantern had gone. It felt as though a piece of me had left with it, yet not in despair. More like an offering, a truth placed in the hands of the river to be carried wherever fate chose. The festival ended, the village slowly dispersing into laughter and warmth. I walked home alone, the cold air sharp against my skin, but inside me there was a strange calm. The letter still lay unsent, but its words no longer weighed so heavily. They had found another path, one she might never see, but one that freed me nonetheless. That night I dreamed of her again. She stood by the river, lantern light flickering across her face, her eyes reflecting the stars. She reached toward me, not with words, but with silence that felt understood. When I woke, the dream clung to me like mist, fragile yet luminous. In the days that followed, I wrote to her again, safe letters filled with small stories of the village. I told her of the festival, of the lanterns that floated like stars on the river. I didn't mention mine or the words it carried. That secret belonged only to the water and to me. Yet when her reply came weeks later, a single line at the end made my breath catch. Sometimes, I imagine our lanterns still drifting, carrying wishes neither of us has spoken aloud. I traced the sentence again and again, until the ink nearly faded under my touch. Perhaps she knew, perhaps she didn't. But in that moment, I felt the thread between us tighten once more, fragile yet unbroken, glowing like a lantern in the dark. Chapter 11, The Second Return. The seasons turned once more, and with them came whispers of her return. The news spread the same way it had before, carried on the lips of neighbors and the laughter of children. But this time, the excitement was tinged with curiosity, even envy. She had been gone longer, and the stories of her success had grown in the telling. How she spoke with confidence in classrooms filled with strangers. How she won praise from teachers. How she walked streets lined with lights brighter than any stars. For days before her arrival, I felt the familiar restlessness, hope and fear tangled together. I tried to prepare myself, telling my heart not to expect too much, not to cling to the memories of what once was. But when the day came and I saw her step down from the cart, all such defenses crumbled. She was the same and she was not. The woolen coat she wore was finer, her scarf patterned with colors the village rarely saw. Her posture was straighter, her eyes sharper, her smile more measured. She carried the city in her every gesture as though it had seeped into her bones. Yet when her gaze found me across the crowd, something softened, and for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed the girl who had once chased frogs by the river. We greeted each other with words too polite, voices too formal, as though the months apart had built walls we didn't know how to climb. Later, when the crowd thinned, she sought me out. "It feels strange," she said, standing at the edge of the fields. "Everything looks smaller than I remember." "Or maybe," I replied quietly, "you've grown larger." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Her days in the village were busy. Relatives came with endless questions, neighbors arrived bearing gifts, and children followed her like shadows. She answered them all with patience, but I saw the weariness in her eyes. In the evenings, when the noise faded, we found stolen moments together. We walked by the river once more. The water was calmer than I remembered, its surface catching the pale light of the moon. She told me about the city, the lectures, the libraries, the new opportunities opening before her. She spoke of professors urging her to travel abroad, of chances to see places even the maps in our school books had not captured fully. Her voice brimmed with excitement, yet beneath it I sensed something else, hesitation perhaps, or guilt. "Do you ever feel," she asked suddenly, "that the more you reach for, the farther you drift from where you began?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to say yes, that I felt it every day, that I lived it in every letter she sent and every silence between. But the words stuck heavy and unsaid. Instead, I asked, "And is that drifting a bad thing?" She looked at me, eyes reflecting the river's glow. "I don't know, maybe it's the only way forward, but sometimes I wonder what I'm leaving behind." The silence that followed was filled with everything neither of us dared to name. In the days that remained, I noticed how differently she moved through the village. Where once she had blended into its rhythms, now she seemed like a visitor, hovering just above its soil. She admired the blossoms, but her eyes searched beyond them toward horizons unseen. One evening, as the lantern light flickered between us, I almost told her about the letter unsent, about the lantern I had set adrift on the river. But when I looked at her, so full of unspoken dreams, I knew that my confession would not anchor her. It would only weigh her down. On her final morning, the cart stood waiting once again. The villagers gathered, offering farewells and blessings. She embraced them all, her laughter warm but distant. When she turned to me, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Will you wait for me again?" she asked, half in jest, half in hope. I wanted to say yes, as I always had. But this time the word lodged in my throat. Instead, I managed a smile. "I always do." She looked at me then, long and searching, as though she wished to speak more but chose silence instead. Then she stepped onto the cart and the wheels began to turn. I stood at the edge of the road, watching until she disappeared beyond the bend. Around me, the village returned to its rhythm, but within me, something shifted. Her return had not been the same as the first. It carried the weight of distance, the certainty of paths diverging. That night, I opened the drawer and held the unsent letter once more. Its edges had grown worn, its paper yellowed with time. I thought of burning it, of releasing it like the lantern on the river. But instead, I placed it back, knowing it belonged not to fire nor to her, but to me, to the boy who had once believed that waiting was enough. And as I lay in the silence of my room, I realized the truth I had tried to ignore. She would always return, but never fully, and each return would carry her farther away. Chapter 12, The Last Letter. The seasons circled once more. Time, as it always does, dulled the edges of longing, but never erased them. Life in the village pressed on. Fields needed tending, roofs needed mending, children grew taller. I moved through the days as though I belonged entirely to them, yet each evening, when the sky burned with twilight, I found myself drawn to the drawer where her letter lay hidden. By now, the envelope was brittle, its corners curling, the ink faded but still legible. I had never dared to send it. It was written for a version of her that no longer existed, for the girl who once waded barefoot into the river, who once sat beside me and swore the stars would never change. She had returned twice, each visit shorter, her eyes always looking farther away. The rumors spoke of her triumphs in the city, of scholarships and invitations to lands across oceans. They spoke, too, of the possibility that she might not return again, that her life had grown too vast for our narrow village lanes. At first, I resisted believing it. I clung to the rhythm of waiting as though patience alone could summon her back. But slowly the truth settled. She no longer belonged to this soil. It was not betrayal nor abandonment. It was simply the way of growth. Flowers once uprooted cannot return unchanged to the earth that once cradled them. One night after a long day of harvest, I sat by the river. The lanterns of the autumn festival floated past, their flames flickering like fragments of memory. Children laughed, couples whispered, the air thick with roasted chestnuts and song. Yet I felt apart from it all, watching as though through a veil. In my pocket lay the letter. My fingers brushed its fragile edges, and I knew what I must do. I stood, walked to the water's edge, and unfolded the paper. My eyes scanned the words one final time, clumsy, tender, brimming with a boy's certainty that love could anchor the world. For years, I had guarded it as though it were proof of something lasting. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a monument to a moment that had already passed. With a breath, I set the letter upon the water. The current took it gently, carrying it downstream, its ink bleeding into the river like veins dissolving. For a moment, it seemed to hover, stubbornly intact. Then slowly, it surrendered, breaking apart until nothing remained but ripples. I watched until the last fragment disappeared. That night, I wrote again, not to her, but for myself. It was a short letter, a quiet one, acknowledging the truth I had come to hold. We were children once, and we loved as children do, with hearts too large for our hands. You grew as you were meant to, and I remained as I was meant to. Perhaps our paths were never meant to converge, only to touch briefly and remind us of what it means to dream. I release you now not with sorrow but with gratitude. For the laughter, for the silence, for the waiting, for it all, may your horizons stretch ever wider. May mine in their smallness be enough. I folded the paper, but this time I did not hide it in a drawer. I placed it upon my desk, unsealed, unguarded. It was not meant to be sent. It was simply meant to be written. Seasons continued. The village remained. I grew older, my hands rougher from work, my hair streaked with gray. And though sometimes I still dreamed of her, the girl with laughter like wind through reeds, I no longer woke with ache. Instead, I carried her memory like a lantern. Something once alight, now softly dimmed, yet still guiding in its quiet way. Years later, a traveler passing through brought news. She had gone abroad, far beyond even the cities she once spoke of. She had built a life of learning, of speaking to crowds, of walking among monuments I could not imagine. She had married, perhaps or perhaps not, the details were uncertain, blurred by distance. I listened, and when the traveler left, I returned to my fields, my river, my village. The news stirred no storm within me, only calm. She had become a story I once knew, a story I had lived. And stories, like rivers, are not meant to be held. They are meant to flow. On the final evening of that year, as the sky burned gold and the air carried the scent of ripe grain, I stood once more by the river. Children set lanterns afloat, their laughter carrying across the water. I smiled, not wistfully but warmly. I had written my last letter, and though it would never be read, I knew it had already been answered by the simple, inevitable passage of time.